Hello students, welcome to the answer writing program. Today we'll be discussing 3 questions, 2 questions on international relations and 1 question from current affair, and that would be of economy section. The international relations, we are going to discuss these 2 topics, groupings and agreements, and the second topic would be international institutions, agencies, fora and their structure and mandate. Let's take a look on all these 3 questions. The first question is related to West Asia, India's opportunity and challenges in the relations with West Asia. The second one is related to United Nations Security Council and some challenges plaguing this institution. The third question is related to PLI, which is of economy section. So let's see the first question. India's relationship with West Asia has transformed beyond religion and remittances into the partnership of mutual interests. So, what are the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead for India in its partnership with West Asia? So, the question is saying that India's relationship with West Asia earlier it was religion or remittances oriented. So, first we need to see what is this. In the past, some countries used to play cards against India to seek the support of the Gulf countries, which are Muslim dominated. But this orientation or the considerations have changed with time. Like in the recent past, when India was repealing Article 370, Pakistan tried to sought the support from Gulf countries, but the West Asian countries denied to come on board with Pakistan. Means the wave is being changing. And the second is remittances. Earlier, India used to export the labor and import the energy. So, the context is saying that now the relations is not limited to the export of labor. Means they are sending the remittances. Now, the relations are above all these things. Means the relations, the dimensions of the relations is continuously changing. Now we are dwelling deep with each other in cases of trade, security and energy. Okay, so this is the context set in the question. Now the question is asking that what are the opportunities which are there in front of India if India continues to enhance the ties with West Asia. And we have to write some challenges also. So these will be the 2 body parts. So let's start with the intro. In intro, you can use this context, whatever we have discussed, that how it has changed from the religion and the remittances to the new domains, that is trade, energy, security, connectivity, etc. Or you can use some current affair, means what has exactly happened, like Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, FTA, between India and the Gulf Cooperation Council, then I2U2, Israel, India, UAE and USA. So these agreements have enhanced the economic ties or the economic diplomacy and the diplomatic relations between India and West Asia. So you can use these context also. This thing we have already discussed, that how these dimensions of the relations have changed above remittances and religion. Now let's come to the body. We need to see what are the opportunities for India in West Asia. The question is asking also about the mutual interest. Mutual interest means the win-win situation for both the countries. Means India will also get benefited in that relation and West Asia is also getting benefited with that particular relation. So let's see in the domain of energy security. See, India is energy deficit region and West Asia energy surplus region. So they can export the crude oil or the energy, oil, crude oil, any petroleum, and we can import from West Asia. Already 60 to 80% of our energy needs come from the Gulf countries. So this is again the supply and the demand relation. Means the win-win situation for both, means the mutual interest is getting enhanced if we enhance our energy ties more. Next comes the economic ties. The first one is remittances. Approximately 8 million Indian people are there in Gulf countries. So they send the remittances back to India. It bridges the BOP gap. So this is the side from India and they need cheap labor. Again, demand supply. This is also in the mutual interests. Next comes the trade. West Asia is looking for the opportunities to invest, to enhance their trade, to diverse their investments more than this oil exports. And we are in need of the FDI. So again, demand supply. So these way we can enhance our relationship with West Asia in the terms of this and this. Next comes the connectivity. USA has recently proposed that India should build the infrastructural linkages, or the India should link the Western Asian countries with each other, so that India will be presented its role as the infrastructure builder in this West Asian region. And what we can do is, India till here can join with the sea route and connect all these countries via the rail link. So the connectivity will be enhanced, and if the connectivity will be enhanced, energy security will be there. India will be presenting its role as an infrastructure builder. When we increase the connectivity with this region, it means we are getting the passage to the Central Asia. What is the scenario right now? We do not have the direct access to the Central Asia. We have to ask Pakistan to go there. But Pakistan is repeatedly putting the blockages. So that is why we are also building this Chabahar port. So if we link or making the connections with the West Asia, it will directly make us to reach Central Asia. Next thing is, China is increasing or rising its influence in the West Asia by its mission creep. So if India will take the proactive role in the infrastructure builder, so it can counter the rising impact of the China over there. So these are some opportunities lying in front of India if India is investing more in West Asia. So this is the opportunities. Next comes the challenges for the India in West Asia. Let's talk about the challenges in the terms of energy. Energy, we are approximately 60 to 80% dependent. Our energy needs on West Asia. So this is a very great dependency. We have to diverse our energy resources. But in the recent past, we are taking some cheap oil from the Russia as well. But again, it's a very single-sided trade. So we have to diverse our energy requirements or the energy security aspect of the country. Next is economic ties. Again, there is a trade deficit, approximately $66 billion. But now CEPA plus free trade agreement between India and the Gulf countries, they are enhancing or deepening the economic ties. Then next comes the labor. As I've already told you that approximately 88 million Indian diaspora or the Indian population is there in the Gulf countries, they encounter some discriminatory policies. So there is some labor issues over there. Next comes the domestic political issues. In the Gulf countries or in the West Asia, Arab, Saudi Arabia, Iran crisis is there, Yemen war going on, and the proxy wars are there, civil wars are there. So these domestic political issues have the ripple effect over the neighborhood. So India may face some security challenges or some terrorism challenges due to this thing. So these are some challenges for India in the West Asia. Now in the conclusion, what we can write? We can write that India should pursue its Look West policy. To deepen its ties, to promote or strengthen its ties with West Asia. You can just give a reference to Look West policy. So this was our first question. Let's see the model answer. Model answer, it's starting with how the relationship goes beyond the religion and remittances to security, trade and energy security. Then comes the opportunities, labor migration gateway to central. We have already dealt with all these aspects. Next comes the challenges, political instability, security of Indian diaspora, dependence on oil imports, terrorism, regional conflicts, etc. So, in the conclusion, you can write the look west policy, or you can write some ways how to strengthen the relations. We can more engage into the economic aspect. We can take part in the multilateral forums. Then strategic cooperation, maritime security, and we have to enhance the people to people ties. Either you can write this because this is a 10 marker question, so you do not have so much need to dwell deep into the measures aspect. So this completes the first answer. Let's look at the second answer. The Security Council has primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. In this context, analyze the challenges faced by UNSC in fulfilling its mandate of addressing contemporary security issues. So, the question is asking about United Nations Security Council challenges. So, this would be our main body part. But because this question is already setting the context with related to role and mandate of UNSC, so what we can do in our body, we can write something about role and mandate of UNSC like 3 to 4 points. And then we come to the challenges. So this will maintain the good flow of the answer, that first we are writing what UNSC does, then what are the challenges prevailing in the UNSC mandate or the structure, then finally in the way forward or conclusion we can write something about how to improve the efficiency or how to reform its structure, or you can something like write in a concluding way whatever you have written in the question, means answer. So let's start with the introduction. You can use some recent context if there is any challenge with respect to the UNSC mandate. Like we have seen in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, or still prevailing Ukraine Russian crisis, and the failure of United Nations Security Council to handle those conflicts. It means these conflicts have brought the UNSC role under the scrutiny. So this way you can start the introduction. Next comes role and mandate of UNSC. Now let's come to the body. So it maintains the peace and security all over the world. It was made in 1945. Now it's been 78 years of its making or the building of this UNSC. It has helped in maintaining the peace and security all over the world. It works on the principles of the United Nations, on the guiding principles of the United Nations. This is how it helps in maintaining peace and security in the region. Next comes the peacekeeping operation. It oversees and mandates some peacekeeping mission all over the world wherever the conflicts are going on or like civil crises are there. So it protects the civilians. It provides some humanitarian aid as well. Next comes the investigation and the settlement of disputes. It investigates into the disputes and try to resolve by giving some methods to resolve the disputes. Next comes the punitive action. It also punishes the aggressor or the conflictor. Like it imposes the economic sanctions. It puts some military actions also. It asks the countries to put sanction on the aggressor. Like it asks the United States of America to put sanctions on Iran. Next comes the appointment function. So it has a say in appointing the International Court of Justice judges. So this way it has a role in maintaining global peace and security. Next come to the challenges part. Challenges faced by the United Nations Security Council in fulfilling its mandate. First one is outdated structure. As I've already told you, it was built in 1945 and it's been 78 years and approximately 142 new countries have joined the United Nation after this, but still it consists of those permanent 5 members. It is not a representative body. African nations, Asian nations, Mexico, Latin America, these countries are not represented in United Nations Security Council. So how they can take care of all the global economies or the global countries if they do not have the representation at the global scale? So next comes the misuse of the veto. These permanent 5 members, in their political interest, misuse their veto on some resolutions or the sanctions. Like recently, China has objected to the India's proposal to blacklist Pakistan-based Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorist Abdul Rauf Azhar due to its political interest. Next comes the peacekeepers' flaws. There are exploitation, sexual exploitation on the women. There are lack of resources in fulfilling the mandate of United Nations peacekeepers. So next comes the limited capacity for the conflict prevention. It usually involves into the conflict resolution after the conflict has already been happened. They do not take proactive role in curing the conflict. Next comes the transparency in functioning. There is a very less transparent whatever the functions are going on in the decision making process, in the resolution taken. Like America was not being sanctioned when it invaded Iraq, but Russia got sanctions when it invaded Afghanistan. So there are the lack of transparency in functioning of United Nations. So next comes the conclusion or some way forward or the measures to improve the efficiency or the structuring or the reforms in the United Nations Security Council. So coming to the conclusion, you can write some successes so far that it has helped in preventing another world war after the 1945, its creation, or you can write some measures that how this UNSC can perform in a more efficient way. Like the structure should be reformed, it should be more representative, more countries should be involved in the seat or the permanent seat of the Security Council. Next comes the decision making, the sanctions, the resolutions should be more transparent. Next is veto. There should be very careful use of the veto by the members. Then next is modern problems. Now the traditional problems are not very prevalent. Now the modern problems like cyber warfare, space warfare is there. So United Nations Security Council has to reform itself to efficiently work to tackle these modern problems. Next comes is regional organizations. So United Nations Security Council has to work in the collaborated way with the regional organization because they know better about the local issues, local problem or the regional issues. So UNSC and regional organization can work hand in hand to resolve the conflicts or the conflicts to happen. So this way we have completed the second question. Let's see the model answer. In the starting, it is using the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the context, then role of UNSC. We have already discussed everything. Then the challenges. Then next comes some measures to improve, to enhance the working of UNSC. Reform structure should be there, transparency, veto, modern problems, regional organization. And you can conclude that it has to improve its structure. Otherwise, this would sooner or later diminish its relevance. Thus, UNSC must reform itself. So this way we have completed our second answer. Let's see the third answer. Highlight the challenges faced by PLI scheme that need to be addressed to harness its full potential. So question is asking something about PLI scheme and it is only asking about highlighting the challenges. So challenges would be the main body part. And the question is also saying that there are some challenges that need to be addressed to harness its full potential. So we should know about the potential of PLI also, that what it can do if these challenges would be addressed. So let's first understand what this PLI scheme is. If any company increases the sales of the goods which are manufactured in India. So if any company increases the sales of goods in any particular year with some base year, then that company would get incentives of 4 to 6% of additional or incremental sale. So what does this actually mean? Like if we put our money into the bank, we get the savings rate of 4 to 6% per annum. So this is what exactly this scheme is. If we invest in our company, in our businesses, in the production process, government will support us with this much percentage, whatever we increase our sales. So this has a very edge cutting incentives in the manufacturing sector. This can have very multiplier effect. The government is not even asking money to invest in some government thing. They are saying that you have to invest in your businesses, in your production houses, in the industrial houses, so that the manufacturing capabilities or the competency of the whole Indian economy would expand. And in return, we will only provide you with incentives so that you can invest more and more. Your business will also flourish and Indian economy will also get boost. So this is the major background of the PLI scheme. So if you understand the basics of the PLI scheme, that how deep the effects of PLI scheme could be on the manufacturing sector, then you can easily tackle this answer. In introduction, what you can write? You can write about the PLI scheme, the definition, that it is an initiative to revive the manufacturing sector, and it is the initiative under the flagship program of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So you can do with the definition based, or you can link with this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan objectives, that this PLI scheme will enhance the domestic manufacturing capabilities. Plus, it also enhances the competence of the domestic manufacturing sector. So, if the domestic manufacturing capabilities would be enhanced, what does it mean? It can make India a global manufacturing hub. It can be used to substitute the imports. If the manufacturing sector will get a boost, it means job creations would be there. If more and more job creations would be there, unemployment is very less, economic growth would be more, so it will invest or attract the investments. We would export more. So if everything, all this will happen, then the manufacturing sector share in GDP can be boosted to approximately 25%. So this is the potential of this PLI scheme, that it can raise the share of the manufacturing sector to 25%. Exports would be boosted, imports will be substituted, India can be present its role as a global manufacturing hub, it can play a major role in global supply chain. And this would have the ripple effect overall economy. So this would impact the job creations, it attracts the investment, so that it revives the manufacturing sector in a very holistic way. So this PLI scheme is for that. So this was the potential also for this PLI scheme. Like manufacturing, jobs, exports, imports, investment, GDP share, manufacturing, global and global supply chain. So this we have already discussed. Now let's come to the challenges what PLI scheme can have. The first one is value addition versus assembly. As this PLI scheme is sales based, means when the sales would be increased, then 4 to 6% of the incentives would be given on that additional sale. It means it would not encourage much the value addition in the manufacturing sector because it is overlooking that thing. It is only concerned about the sales process, means the assembly sector can get a boost with this. As we have seen in the cases of the mobile manufacturing and the production, that sector got boom with this PLI scheme, but not the other sector as much. Next comes the framework for the fund disbursement. This incentives, whatever the way they can be disbursed amongst the beneficiaries, this is not clear. Like there is no proper criteria or the parameters or the framework on which the ministries or the departments can depend upon and release their funds to the companies who have done the additional sales. Although an empowered committee has been constituted by the government to oversee the implementation of this PLI, but again, the way in which the funds are getting disbursed or to be withdrawn, this is ambiguous still. Next come is big players. The biases, the tilt is towards the big player via this overall the policy of this PLI. As this PLI is dependent on the additional sales, means the big players already they have so much huge investments, they have huge funds to mobilize, so obviously their sale would be more, so they will get or reap the benefits of this PLI scheme disproportionately according as compared to some MSMEs. Although we are overlooking the benefits MSME provides to the economy, it provides the employment to so many people in the economy and they will not get that much benefit as the big players are getting with this PLI. Then comes the labor intensive sector. If PLI scheme would be expanded to the labor intensive sector, then after some time when we have to take it back, this PLI scheme, that would be not very easy because there would be subsidy dependent sector then. So it would be more inefficient when we take back this PLI from these sectors. Next comes is lack of sector specific understanding. Government is just brushing all the sectors in one umbrella. It is saying that the sales have to improved, but there are some sector specific demands of that sector. They cannot be just overlooked that you have to improve the sales. Improve the sales have some determinants like what is their raw material base, is the domestic market is there for that particular product or not, how that sector would improve the sales of the goods. The structural impacts the government has overlooked in this thing. Then WTO limits. Some WTO rules related to the subsidy can prevent this domestic manufacturing sector to grow. Already there are some countries which have challenged this PLI scheme to the WTO like Japan, European Union, and if this PLI scheme would result into this WTO non-compliance, that it would give a setback to the domestic manufacturing sector. So finally what we can do is we can write some data about the successes of PLI in the conclusion. Like we have seen the maximum production or the sales of mobile phones in 2021 to 2023 due to this PLI scheme. Or you can write some way forward that what are some reforms required to tackle these challenges. So these are some challenges, that some infrastructural issues should be handled, some structural issues should be taken care of instead of just focusing on the sales thing. Like we have to improve the efficiency of the manufacturing sector, we have to take care of the infrastructure development, then we have to give a push for the labor intensive sector to ensure the long-term sustainability. So this way we have completed the third answer also. Now let's see the model 1. Answer, it is starting from the introduction, the PLI scheme and its background, that it was launched for the 3 sector, later it got extended to 14 sector. Then objectives, then potential, then there are some challenges, and finally concluded with some reforms that focusing on the supply chain co-location, we have to increase the efficiency of domestic manufacturing, infrastructural development, etc. So this was our discussion for the day. Thank you and have a nice day.